Meanwhile, we've heard from Representative Dr. John Bison as well in recent days. Now joining us from Kalamazoo today, Representative Jon Hoadley is with us. Good morning.
Well, good morning.
How are you?
Today is another day.
Yeah. Off we go.
Off we go. I mean, it's crazy, right? We're getting rain.
And 60 degrees, 2 days before Christmas. I don't mind, personally. But I know some people are out there itching for some snow.
I think we paid our dues the last couple of years, so we'll take an easy one this year, right?
Then you have that angle that some folks have brought up that last December was pretty quiet and mild, too, and then the first week of January, reality set in and how.
Well, let's not do that. Let's not do that this year.
Not do that. So last week was a marathon session kind of week. Man, what was that one night? How long was that?
I mean, we were there 10:30 and 11-ish, Tuesday and Wednesday last week.
Mm-hmm.
They usually do this for the last 4 or 5 years. The Republican leadership does this at the end of December, and what they try to do is pass through all the bills that they want folks to forget about by the time we get to the election. And so we had a couple of those last week.
All right. Now, to be fair, do Democrats do this too if they're in charge?
I mean, not at the same extent, right? We haven't. Back when Democrats controlled the House, the Senate was still controlled by the Republicans.
Mm-hmm.
So there was some balance there. I mean, but now for the last 4 years and before, it's been just a rush of getting legislation through because Republicans saw this as an opportunity to, like I said, to get these bills through when most voters aren't paying attention.
So one of them was this straight party ticket option elimination.
That's right.
What happened?
Well, so what happened with this bill, and I was really disappointed to see this, is between this bill and what's called Senate Bill 571, which we'll talk about in a second, it was really just partisan vote rigging. And that's really what this was. Senate Bill 13 eliminates the straight party option. So when you're voting, you can't just click one bubble and vote for all the party members on a partisan office. And the reason that this is disappointing is because all of the clerks associations, all the folks that actually administer elections on the ground, came up and testified that this is going to make lines longer. So because instead of filling out one bubble, which 2 million people between Democrats and Republicans and third-party folks use this every election, that now they're going to have to be in the lines longer, and they're going to have to fill up more time in those booths. So ultimately, what happened originally in the House is that Representative Lyons tried to pair it with a very scaled-down version of no reason absentee voting.
Right.
So if you want to skip those longer lines, maybe you could just go in and get a ballot. And what ended up happening is that the Senate is so opposed to it that they broke those two bills apart, and they only passed the one that makes lines longer and shut down the one that would have made it easier to vote.
So we've been talking about this. We talked about it with Dr. Bison. We talked about it with the Calhoun County clerk. And when we come back in a minute, I'll tell you what they said, and we'll see how this matches up with how you feel. That's coming up in just a minute with Representative Jon Hoadley. 813 WBCK. 15 WBCK, Representative Jon Hoadley is here from Kalamazoo. We're talking about recent developments in the House and Senate as well. Now, we were talking about the straight party ticket option. So Dr. Bison voted against it. When he was here, he said, I heard from both Democrats and Republicans saying, we want that to stay. So he voted against it. As well, the Calhoun County clerk, Ann Norlander, was here and said, I understand the thing about lines, but this isn't Best Buy on Black Friday. Let me tell you, they don't line up here like they should. So she wasn't too worried about lines at this point.
I'm worried about it in Kalamazoo.
Yeah.
In 2012, the student voting precinct in Kalamazoo was one of the last precincts to close in the state. Because, what we see here is that voting precincts are determined by, you can have up to 3,000 registered voters. But oftentimes the way they're staffed is determined by previous election turnout. And so what happens is for some of these student voting precincts or some of these dense urban precincts that have the maximum number of registered voters, but lower turnout in some years, what ends up happening then is that there's a surge of voters and the machines and the setup is not able to handle that. And here's the thing we know. Michigan has one of the longest ballots in the country. We have the 6th longest wait times in the country on average, and the average person is waiting 22 minutes. And if you say to yourself, I didn't wait 22 minutes,
right,
that means someone then waited 44 minutes to make the average. And so, when you put all these things together, here's what we really know. These bills were designed specifically to make the problem that occurs in some dense urban areas, which primarily are either students, young people, or people of color, to wait longer in lines in the effort to get them to say, I've had enough, I got to deal with my kids, I got to go back to work, and then not vote. And that's what makes this so undemocratic.
Now, the other side of that argument is, if you go in and you can't choose all Republican or all Democrat in one bubble and be done and run, then you are forced to look at every race and every candidate and say, what do these people stand for?
That is disingenuous, and let me tell you why. I actually offered amendments on the floor that would have removed all partisan information from the ballot. So you'd have to go look down and know each one of those names and know what they stand for.
Wow.
But what you're going to see now is it's still going to come down to the state house race on the 60th district on the ballot. It will say my name, Jon Hoadley, Democrat. And then it'll say a Republican name and Republican.
Right.
So if they really wanted to say know each person, then they could have adopted my amendment. But all they wanted to do was inconvenience voters with the effort that because it'll lengthen lines, some percentage of voters, and particularly these dense urban areas, will decide not to vote. And again, voting should be made more accurate, secure, and convenient, and this fails on all three of those.
So what about those who represent the districts to which you refer, the ones where lines, in theory, will be longer? What are they saying? Are they saying the same message you are?
Absolutely. And that's why we saw it was only Republicans who voted for the bill, but there was bipartisan opposition to the bills. Because what a lot of folks know is that this is an effort and a tool that Michigan has had for years. And in all the other states that have changed it, they've modernized their voting process somehow. Online voter registration, no reason absentee, vote by mail, registration portability, early voting, all these options that give people the flexibility to go engage in their right as Americans to go vote. Instead of Michigan, we just said, we're going to make your lines longer, and then we're going to take away this option.
With no other option.
With nothing on the table.
So what now?
Well, there's a couple of things now. The first is that I think people need to really be aware that this vote rigging happened. And, it was coupled with another bill, too. Senate Bill 571, which started as an innocuous bill, 12 pages, bipartisan support. All of a sudden, 10 minutes before we're supposed to vote on it, there was a substitute. And they swapped out a 12-page bill for a 53-page bill. And they didn't let Democrats really know that it was on the system until about 30 seconds before we were supposed to vote. And so what happened here is that this bill got very scary. And here's why. Because it prohibits public bodies, think about your school board, from providing factual information within 60 days of a millage vote. So not saying vote for or vote against, it can't even tell you what's on the ballot. And here's what I'd say, that when the majority says that you can't even speak the facts, that's something that all of us should be very scared about.
So now it goes to the governor.
It goes to the governor. I would encourage folks call and request a veto. And, it's one of those things where we shouldn't be passing bills that rig elections in the dead of night. And that's exactly what happened here. There was no debate on these expanded changes because there was a substitute offered literally minutes before we were supposed to vote on it. To get these bills through the Senate, they locked them in the chambers. I mean, these are the type of things that you see in a banana republic. You don't see this, and Michigan residents don't deserve this type of hoodwinking that we saw happen here. And frankly, this is different. That we oftentimes disagree on policies. I voted against the corporate welfare pyramid scheme rigging thing. Other people voted for it. Who cares, right? Like, that was a decision. It was made. We move on. But when the majority party, the Republican leadership, chose to rig the rules so that they could win the elections, I mean, that's something that, we should all be outraged regardless of what your party is.
Is the public clear that this was the timeline of how this worked?
Oh, I'm sure it wasn't because, this is something that happened at 10:30 at night on a Wednesday. There was no publicizing this sort of information. If those of us on the floor knew about these changes less than 10 minutes before we actually voted on them, how would the average public get aware of them?
Mm-hmm.
They weren't put on the system. They weren't heard in a committee. They weren't adequately debated on the floor. So I can't imagine if I was at 10:30 at night, I might have already been asleep if I was at home.
I know I was.
Right? So how are you going to weigh in and call your representative and say, you know what, I want my local school board to be able to inform me about what the facts on a millage are?
Mm-hmm. Representative Jon Hoadley is with us. We'll come back in a minute after a look at the weather and talk more about this and some other things, too. WBCK Monday. 24. WBCK Representative Jon Hoadley's here, Democrat from Kalamazoo. So, all right, somebody might say okay, I value the right to vote. I'm going to do my homework. This might deter an uninformed voter, and that's good.
Well, I think that's un-American, what was just suggested there. In this country, we got away, we removed literacy tests to the right to vote because we don't judge people on their ability to read so for them to demonstrate a right guaranteed to them in our American Constitution. And to say that there's some sort of objective standard on how someone is informed enough to go vote has been ruled unconstitutional. But beyond that, you might be making a very informed decision when you decide to cast a straight ticket vote or when you're trying to get through the line. The issue here isn't just that folks are making a quick decision. Remember what I said, that these lines are getting longer in places?
Right.
Elections are not holidays in America. If you're under the age of 60, you have to have a reason legally to vote absentee. And if you are a working family, like so many of my friends that I know, you might be juggling the 30 minutes that you have on your lunch hour, and then knowing that you had to pick your kids up from work or from school right after work, you don't have the time or flexibility to go vote. So to say that that person should be denied a basic right because of the election administration or a long ballot, I mean, that's un-American, and we should all be worried about that.
So, I talked to the governor last week. I asked him about the straight party ticket thing. He said, no, I'm not going to talk about that till I know it's for real. Okay, it's for real now. The presumption is he'll sign it, I presume, right?
Well, I hope he doesn't. I hope he says this. I hope he vetoes it and says, when you send me a piece of legislation that will deal with the concern about longer lines, then I'm willing to look at them both. That's the tack that the House originally took.
Right.
And I hope that he says, I can't sign up for vote rigging, because that's just not who he is.
All right. So if it does get signed, it's over, or is there going to be backlash here?
I think I think this is illustrating a broader point. The first off is, because it's a clear violation of civil rights in the Voting Rights Act, I assume that there'll be some sort of lawsuit filed. But beyond that, I think that Michigan voters deserve some modernization in our voting process, and we're not there. So I'm hoping that folks take it upon themselves to do some sort of initiative. Many other states, we're talking high 20s, low 30s, have adopted vote by mail, absentee ballots, online voter registration, portable registration. So once you're registered, you're always registered. These sort of things that will help ease the ability to go get a ballot, be very informed when you go cast it, because you have the time to study it and ask questions, and then make sure that as many people can participate as possible. If the legislature under the Republican leadership is unwilling to do that, well, then maybe we need to send it to a vote of the people.
All right, running out of time, but I wanted to bring this up. We're hoping next week to talk with Senator Margaret O'Brien, who requested the governor study this I-94 stretch out here where we had 200 cars piled up almost a year ago. You saw the results of that. What do you think? Was that what you expected?
The big thing from that report was you need to slow down. You need to, drive aware. And I think that's a good lesson to learn. The only thing that I was disappointed with the audit is there was only a few cosmetic changes made from the report. So they're going to increase speed up the acquisition of some signage, and that's a good thing. But I would have liked to see if there was something more concrete they could have done when actually talking about concrete. So can we, look at widening? Can we look at changing some of those textures, especially in those dips that we know are out there? So I'm hopeful that we can go back and, see if there's some additional tweaks to be made. But the big takeaway was, when you see snow, go slow.
Mm-hmm. Right. And when we talked to MDOT about the widening thing, they shook their head and said, yeah, that's not going to happen anytime soon.
Well, there's other options with the way the materials that we use on the concrete, and they've explored some of those. So I just hope that it's not a closed story on this yet. And I do appreciate that Senator O'Brien brought that conversation up and requested the audit. But it looks like kind of what we knew going in is what we saw coming out of the report.
Yeah.
Slow down.
Right. And then it was interesting. Friday night, 131 north of Kalamazoo, Grand Rapids area, 50 cars.
Yep.
Did anybody hear that?
Right.
Slow down.
Slow down.
Representative Jon Hoadley, we always appreciate your time.
Thanks for having us.
8:20.